a new nation like South Sudan must hire diplomats to work in foreign capitals, gain recognition by over 190 countries, and become full member of the United Nations. Where do you think is South Sudan in this long process right now?
I think South Sudan had a very unique experience, because if you look at what came in the comprehensive peace agreement, there was an interim period of 6 years. So during that, we had what we call the one country, two system, in which Southern Sudan had its own army, and it has its own government, and it has also its own foreign representation, you know. So as I speak to you now, and Southern Sudan is not yet independent, we are already represented in about 15 countries, and Eritrea, of course, is one of them. And I've been doing partly diplomatic work for the last 5 years, you know. So, and Southern Sudan is not yet independent, and by the time that Southern Sudan is going to get independent, I would have worked as a diplomat for maybe 5 years, and that's when I start. So I can say in terms of getting the experience and in terms of being prepared, maybe we are lucky than other countries who actually got independence before us, you know, because they didn't have the same arrangement. It was just on day one, new country, there you start and fend for yourself. So I think Southern Sudan is in terms of, if you compare it to other countries, I think we had what was quite unique. We had some kind of like a taste of to feel what the government is, that, you know, before you become an independent state. So, but I of course acknowledge that there will be a lot of difficulties, and many people spoke before me about how poor the infrastructure is, and of course it's hard to come by real data of what is really happening in Southern Sudan. All of the figures that you hear are either given to you by NGO, and of course we know sometimes that some of these figures are given because they want to use them for appealing for donations and so on. But I feel that all the countries almost started like this from nothing. You know, it's real hard work. We realize that it's going to be momentous work. That is why we have been reaching out to all of our friends and to say they should help us where they can in terms of their experience and of course in terms of advice and so on. I just came back from Asmara, and we have been talking to the Eritrean government, which, as you know, is the country that got independence before us 20 years ago, and we feel that we have similar experience, and we have asked them whether they could be able to help us in some ways.
Oh, okay. So, Peter, I'm going to go to you now. What do you think about that? What do you think about these two nations, I mean, are obviously joined by numerous bonds and historical, economic, and otherwise. Will they just have to figure out a way to work together?
Between North and South Sudan, you mean?
Yes.
Well, yes. I mean, you know, there's been lots of the rhetoric from the politicians on both sides has, until, well, relatively recently, been pretty positive. You know, both sides saying that what they really want is, you know, is for the benefit of the two countries. Of course, the key thing will be the oil. You know, most of the oil, or the current oil that's known about and is being drilled, lies in the south. As by 80% of Sudan's reserves lies in the south. But the pipelines, well, they only run north through northern Sudan to Port Sudan on the Red Sea coast. So there's real pressure, and it is an absolute necessity that both North and South Sudan work together. If they don't, then the oil upon which the entire country's economy depends here in the south, is about 98% of the government budget, that's absolutely crucial. If they don't have the access to the pipeline through the north, then there's no money for the south. So there's real practical pressure needed to maintain good relations between the two future countries.
Yeah, that's true, Gaida. Of course, after listening to this, the obvious question that has to be asked would be, what type of relationship would South Sudan have with the North, both in terms of diplomacy and economics? What are your thoughts about this?
So far from what we have seen, although the South has voted for referendum there is still all the tension going on between the northern and the southern governments still. Recently, in the past few days, the South Sudan officials, they released some documents that proves the northern government were aiding in funding groups to destabilize the South. So there are still a lot of tensions between the two, and they're still not able to perform or work together as neighboring countries yet. They still look like how they started a few years ago. But still, there are a lot of issues that are not resolved between the two countries, and this is why it has contributed to the tension that's going on right now. So hopefully by the time that the referendum is fully established in July 9th, we will see that cooperation coming between the two countries. But so far, we're still seeing the tension and the war going on between, not war in the specific term, but the competition, the tension, the release of documents. So this is still going on right now, and hopefully we'll see more signs of cooperation as the time goes on. But I have to be optimistic that this will take place. But what is going on now is still making me believe that there are a lot of issues between the two that they can just not resolve and continue to work as neighboring governments yet.
Okay. So speaking of unrest, as the South celebrates, there are rumbles of discontent in the North. It seems like a wave of democratic revolts we've all witnessed across North Africa has the potential to spread to Khartoum. Some of the most recent news reports indicate that Sudanese police officers arrested about a dozen protesters in downtown Khartoum who are calling for an end to the President Omar al-Bashir's 21-year rule. Do you think these protests could grow in Sudan? Philippe, since you're in Khartoum, you could start with that.
I think people have always been talking about popular uprising taking place in Khartoum, and in Khartoum is not. All Sudan is not unique to this popular uprising. It had happened before. Nigeria was overthrown through a popular uprising. The government of Aboud was thrown through a popular uprising. So even before the referendum, there were talks that the majority of the people in the north really were not for this secession, and they believe that the National Congress Party government is the one that is responsible for dividing the country. And if there was a way, they would have wanted to overthrow it through a popular uprising. But personally, I don't think that will be possible at this moment, because you see, the Sudan now is more of a police state. Security apparatus are all over the place, and there's total control. And then the other thing is that Sudan is at war. It's not like Egypt. It's not like Tunisia. So any kind of demonstrations or anything can be viewed, and can also you can be categorized to be part of the opposition, like maybe from Darfur. And if you are arrested, because the country is on a war footing, the situation is not similar to these countries. So I think many people in Khartoum are a little bit cautious, really, about coming out to the street and demonstrating Egyptian style or Tunisian style, because they know that for a fact the security can crack down on them and say that they are being used by some of the rebel groups that are, yeah. So I really don't see, personally, on a personal level, I don't see any uprising taking place in Khartoum this soon.
Oh, thank you. So bringing it back to journalism, according to UNHCR's 2010 Freedom of the Press report on Sudan, state-imposed pre-publication censorship was a common occurrence for much of 2009. Officials from the National Intelligence and Security Service were employed at each newspaper to review articles prior to printing. What role do you see the free independent media playing in the coming years as Sudan navigates events that are unpredicted in its history? Peter, I'll pitch this to you.
Well, yeah, I think it's worth, of course, pointing out, given that we're talking about the splitting of Sudan, that the situation in the north of the press and the situation in the south of Sudan concerning the press is very different. What the UNHCR probably is referring to is largely the northern oppression of very difficult for journalists to write freely and openly in the north of Sudan. In the south, where I'm calling from, there are still restrictions. We're still waiting for a press law to be passed to guarantee journalists' right to publish information and news. And there are still cases of repression here. A newspaper was shut down briefly in recent weeks. So there are still cases. But of course, I think the press will be absolutely critical in building South Sudan and making sure that it's going to be a country that's not like the old Sudan, that it's a place where people can speak out, it's a place where people do have their freedoms. And of course, I think the journalists will be critical to ensuring that, and it's got to be guaranteed that their voice is free and they're not restricted by the old laws that were still in place in Khartoum.
Yeah. So, Gada, you wanna give us your thought about what the freedom of press is like from your perspective?
I actually would like to jump in. The South Sudan government now, I believe, has a responsibility to make sure that the press is free, not just because of all the talk of the freedom of the press, but this is a fundamental sign of democracy. And they succeeded from the north because they would like to establish and build their own country from the ground up. This would not happen if they did not ensure the freedom of the press, because there would be some funding, there would be some projects, and if the press is not there to make sure that they're watching every step of the process, there would be a lot of room for corruption. And otherwise, the press would be just like what Professor Ibrahim mentioned. It would be just educational. But the press has a role. It has a watchdog role. And if the South Sudan government did not allow the press to report and investigate and do editorial work, they would prove to the world that we're watching that they're not really different from the North Sudan government that they work so hard to separate from. So it's not a choice. It's not rhetoric. It's a real responsibility. And I really hope that the South Sudan government will take this issue very seriously and ensure the freedom of the press as a sign of democracy.
Okay, so what do you think about this, Philip? What do you think would be the role of press would be in a free, independent media playing in the coming years in Sudan?
I think as a person, hello?
Yes.
I think as a person who has a media background, my dream is to see a South Sudan where the press is free to inform people, to investigate cases, and then to report the facts as they are. Okay. Yeah, but unfortunately, as I said before, most of the press that we have still in Southern Sudan is underdeveloped, and due to reasons that I've told you before, and Peter before talked about still waiting for the press laws, which will govern, not restrict, but govern at least, so that we need a free press, but we also need a responsible press.
Yes,
and
that's
as you
right.
know, South Sudan is a society that is polarized, among ethnic and tribal lines. You don't want to have some of the press which will be funding some
All right.
of these.
So I'm going to have to interrupt you over here with the great idea of having a free press. This concludes our interview for today. Thank you for joining in this discussion at such an exciting time for the newly independent nation of South Sudan. Thank you all for our guests, Dr. Ibrahim Abdullahi, Peter Martel. Ismail couldn't make it, but thank you for confirming your interview. Philippe Jada and Gada Khalid, we will continue to follow your work. Our director is Travis McMillan, audio by Pat Akers. The producers of Global Journalists are Rebecca Olfesen, David Catwan, Ryan Kress, Jessica Popovic. Our video producer is Tim Wall. I'm Salim Solomon for Global Journalists, and you can listen to this show or any other past programs and other features on globaljournalist.org/radio.